Okay, good evening, virtue signalling keyboard warriors and people who actually get up off their asses and go out and put some real work into issues that actually matter. My name's Danny, this is My Own Worst Enemy, mental health podcast. I had my first run-in with the Mock Outrage Brigade on Twitter this week, so just having a playful little dig. And let me tell you, if you found any of my previous episodes offensive, you're really going to see your mad little asses about this one. Anyway, before we get into all that, I've been saying for a while now that I wanted to do more video interviews, and I actually did my first one back in January on the topic of eating disorders with Ulrika Schmidt, and that's episode 11, if you want to go back and listen to it. And it sort of went okay, but I just remember being completely stuck in my head the entire time because I was so self-conscious being on camera for the first time. And even though the interview's perfectly fine, I'm completely happy with the final product. Ulrika was great. I've even had emails off girls thanking me for doing that particular episode. For me, it wasn't a great experience just because I was so kind of stuck in my head the entire time. I was sort of losing my train of thought. There was times when Ulrika was saying something and a question would spring to mind, but by the time she'd finished speaking, I'd forgotten what I wanted to ask her. I was sort of struggling to find my words. I couldn't articulate myself properly. And honestly, the way my head was spinning doing that episode, you'd have thought I was sort of live on TV at halftime at the Super Bowl, not just doing some little tin pot shitty podcast in South Manchester, broadcasting to absolutely nobody. The other problem with video interviews is you can't chop and edit them up to the same degree that you can with just audio. You can see the joins, so to speak, when you start getting a bit too carried away. And I'm very perfectionistic. I like to sort of edit out all the and ahhing, any extraneous words, mouth sounds, breathing sounds, things like that. I just like it to sound nice and crisp and clean. And I have calmed down with that, to be fair, a little bit recently, but I still get caught up in it. And if you've been listening recently, I keep saying that I want to start producing content more often. At the moment I'm doing one podcast a week. And I'd like to increase that to maybe 2 or 3 even, start producing more video content for the YouTube channel. And the thing is, there's no more hours in the day than I've already got, and I'm already struggling because I'm doing so much piss farting about. In fact, there's even less hours in my day now because Leanne's just gone back to work after being on maternity leave for 9 months. So the only way I'm going to be able to produce more content is if I spend less time piss farting about and just putting stuff out there. And so I'm hoping that by concentrating more on video moving forward, because like I say, I can't edit and faff about with it as much as I did with the audio, it's just going to force me to be more productive. Anyway, 11 months later, welcome to episode 2 in the video podcast series. And I've really thrown myself in at the deep end because we're talking about sex, spirituality, and self-consciousness. My guest today is Jessica Graham. Jessica is an actor, producer, and meditation teacher. She's appeared in a number of films, including And Then Came Lola, Devil Girl, and 2 Minutes Later, which won her the Best Actress Award at the Tampa International Gay and Lesbian Film Festival. She's a contributing editor to the popular meditation blog Deconstructing Yourself, and the author of the book which forms the basis of today's discussion, which is Good Sex, Getting Off Without Checking Out. In today's episode, we explore Jessica's journey from sexual trauma and disengagement to her sexual and spiritual awakening. We discuss the impact of social media on people's body image, how different environments can have either a positive or negative impact on our sexual self-image, common reasons why people feel self-conscious and dissatisfied with their sex lives, the importance of honesty when it comes to getting what you want in the bedroom, and how practicing mindfulness between the sheets can lead to a more satisfying sex life. Another thing slightly different about this interview is usually before I interview somebody, I sort of sit down, do a couple of hours research, write out questions, things like that. This time, not so much preparation work. I didn't really do any of that. This time I just I gave Jessica's book a bit of a skim read, sort of picked out the points that I thought would be relevant to our conversation, and then I just sort of rolled with it. So you'll have to let me know what you think of this interview, because there's much less structure than you might be used to if you're a regular listener. Usually I sort of have a 3-act structure going on where we go into the background of the subject, and then we sort of analyse the subject itself, and then we do a bit of sort of practical advice in the 3rd act. But this time, not so much. This one is much more akin to 2 people just sort of sitting down in a pub for a couple of hours and just talking about sex. But I loved it. It's one of my favourite interviews I've ever done. Not just because of the subject matter, you know, it's always fun to talk about sex and what have you, but just because of how much more relaxed the process was. So like I say, you'll have to let me know what you think of this. I mean, I'll still do my sort of methodical dissections of different subjects. You know, we can't have like a jovial conversation about domestic abuse, for instance. But I would like to do more of this sort of casual conversation type stuff. Also, final heads up, there's a lot of fun stuff in here, but the language does get quite explicit at times, and we cover topics like sexual trauma, sexual abuse, and there's even a little bit in there where we talk about rape fantasies, which, you know, not everybody's cup of tea. So there's your warning. Anyway, all that said, please enjoy my conversation with Jessica Graham. Okay, Jessica Graham, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me, especially on video for the first time in a while.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Right. Today, another interesting one. We're talking about sex, but specifically we're talking about how to have good sex and mindful sex as well. I'm guessing that regular listeners of the podcast will be thinking, hang on a minute, what's this got to do with mental health? Well, I've already told you I'm expanding the remit for a start, okay? But also, the reason I contacted you was because so far I've done 2 episodes on masturbation and porn. And so I had an email off somebody saying, okay, fine, interesting, but can we have some good advice for people that are actually getting laid now? So
yeah, that's great.
so that's kind of what we're going into today. So okay, firstly, let me preface this with an answer to that question. But so what's this got to do with mental health? So if anyone's listened to the episode 34, 35 or something like that, where I tell my story, you'll know that I've worked in the sex industry, not as a performer or anything, but with as like a chaperone and as a doorman for escorts, girls that work in massage parlors, girls that work at strip clubs, that kind of thing. And so
thank you for doing that. Thank you for showing up in that way, because those women need your support, and the fact that you are willing to do it, I think is really wonderful. Just to interject.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, just sort of on that note, it was when I first started doing it at the age of like, I got into it when I was 21. And when you're 21, that is doing that it's the most amazing job in the world. But as I got older, you kind of feel that, like you say, even though that was my thing, it was I was good at the job, and I really made sure to take care of the girls that I was looking after. But still, like the older I got, guilt crept in, and you kind of feel complicit in some of the misery that takes place there. So, like for instance, as a driver working for the escort agencies, it'd be quite common for a girl to go into a hotel, somebody's house, have a bad experience, and come back out tearful, upset, and it kind of feel not responsible, but like I say, complicit in it. And just to kind of tie all that together, that's what that job's the insight that job gave me, is seeing both sides of the coin. So it's not all bad. It's definitely not all bad. It's you know, people have amazing experiences and kind of find themselves sexually in those environments. And so I've seen the good and the bad of it. And then a little later on, running a mental health support group, I've met people telling me their stories that involve sexual trauma from childhood, and also just kind of sex being responsible for present misery. So even if they've not had trauma in the past to do with it, people are kind of stuck in relationships where everything's great but the sex, and they feel conflicted by that. People are cheating and feeling bad about it. So that's why I think it ties in. And so yeah, like I say, you've got a book coming out soon called Good
It's
Sex.
out, actually. It came out on the
Oh, is it
2nd.
all? Oh,
Yep.
it's already out. Okay. Oh, so when I contact you, because I contacted you from the upcoming section on Amazon, so that was a couple of weeks ago now. Okay, so it's already out,
Yes.
and well, perfect. So I thought we'll we'll do something for all those people now that are actually getting laid,
Yeah.
and we'll try and give them some good advice on that topic. But as always, before we delve into it, if you could tell us a little bit about you, your history, what brought you to this particular area of interest, why you ended up writing the book, a brief summary, and then we'll sort of dig into it a bit more from there.
Great. So the short version of why I wrote the book is because a publisher asked me to.
Okay.
They gave me some money and they said, write the book. So I had to finish writing it. That's sort of like the really short version, right? I don't think I'd have a book right now if that publisher hadn't contacted me and said, hey, write a book. Because I'm a multi-passionate person. So I have a lot of passions. So just saying that off the bat.
Okay, interesting. But surely there must have been a reason why this publisher
Yeah.
reached out to you in particular. So
Yes, there was. So, okay, so me, I have always been a very spiritual and very sexual person, even when I was very young, very young. And some of the reasons for my early sexuality had to do with trauma and abuse. Some of my early experiences with spirituality had to do with trauma and abuse, but that's just one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that the more and more I contact this authentic person in this activity of self, I recognize that spirituality and sexuality and creativity are the things that turn this animal on. They're the things that feel most alive in this system. And so even though there were some not so great reasons why that was such a big part of my life, there were also really good reasons. And so even when I was a teenager, I had, people would come to me. Someone got pregnant, needed to go to Planned Parenthood. More than once I went with like teenage friends to Planned Parenthood when I was a kid. More than once I explained to a female friend how to give a blowjob. More than once I had a male come to me and say he was having feelings for other men, and just talking that out. So I was always sort of, someone that could be of service through the realm of sexuality. But when it really came to my own sex life, I was very shut down. Even though I had sex and I had some exciting sex and I had some kinky sex and all of that, there was this aspect of total lack of embodiment. I was not really experiencing it in my body. I was mostly experiencing it in my head. And that's what most people complain about when they come to me. They say, I can't get out of my mind. I'm either worried I'm not going to come, or I'm worried I am going to come, or I'm, worried that they think I'm fat, and on and on and on, right? And so I was in my head. And oftentimes what I would need to do, not oftentimes, pretty much every time, what I would need to do is be drunk or high, some version of that. In order to let go of this sense of hiding out while I was having sex. And so when I was about 27, I stopped drinking and stopped doing drugs and started meditating. And I had really hit a real bottom as far as emotionally, psychologically, mentally. What is it, 10 and a half years ago, I was wandering around Hollywood trying to get a crisis center to take me. I was suicidal. I couldn't get up. I couldn't get off the floor. And that wasn't unusual. I had had a history of, I'd been diagnosed with major or severe depression and, all kinds of stuff, right? Like I could probably have had more diagnoses if I wanted them, but I've never been much for being diagnosed. Feels so much just like a label to me. But in any case, I dealt with a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression, and an eating disorder. I was very anorexic. And at this point, when I quit drinking and kind of started meditating, I was really at a bottom with all of that. I was really underweight to the point where my hair was falling out. I was completely anxious and depressed. and I was suffering endlessly. And really, I recognize now that I had been suffering my whole life, you know, it had been my whole life. And so when I started to meditate, and I took the drugs and alcohol out of the equation, so I didn't have that way of checking out, I started to wake up. It was like I wasn't plugged into the matrix anymore. It was like I was seeing life and myself and others in the world as it really is, not through this filter of my suffering. And it was so profound and so sort of life-changing and earth-shattering, like just complete paradigm shift, that eventually it couldn't help but start to spill into my sex life. And so then I started bringing this sense of spirituality, mindfulness into my sex life with my partners, and started having amazing spiritual experiences during sex, and started to encounter all of this trauma that I then had the capacity to work through and heal, because I could finally really see it, because I was actually getting in touch with what was really going on inside of me, instead of just the ba 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 of the mind. And so at some point I started writing for a online magazine called Deconstructing Yourself. And after a few years, I decided to write an article about sex, and it was called Mindful Sex: Getting Off Without Checking Out. And it was wildly popular. I had book agents contact me, and I was like, whoa, too much. No, I'm not ready for all that. So I wrote for another few years. And then what happened is, because of social media, my articles got shared, far and wide. And then when you Googled mindful sex, I would show up on the first page. I still show up on the first page. And so when a publisher decided, my previous publisher, who I'm not actually with at this point, I'm now with North Atlantic, but when my previous publisher, the developmental editor or acquisitions editor, Googled mindful sex, she found me. And she emailed me. She said, want to write a book? I said, okay.
Okay. So, right, there's plenty to dig into there. So I guess a good place to start was when, right at the beginning, then you mentioned having, you said you always sort of been a sexual person, but at the same time, you was, when it came to having an active sex life, you were saying
Mm-hmm.
you were cut off from yourself, and you was all in your head
Mm-hmm.
instead
Yes.
of in your body.
Yeah.
But was it well, you said you've had good sex and kinky sex and all those things. So I guess I'm wondering, what was your kind of what was your introduction to sex then,
Yeah.
in answer to this, having always been a sexual person?
Yeah. So my parents were very open sexually with me. I knew about sex at a young age. They were very sex positive, neither of my parents were sexually abusive with me, which helps. And for the most part, they did their best to keep me safe. But they were very open about sexuality. And so, I saw them having sex. Not that they wanted me to, but I would sneak up. When they wanted to have sex, they would say we were allowed to watch TV. And we just had this one little black and white TV that was kept in a closet. And we knew when they said, you can watch TV, that something was going to happen. And we would go up and we would like peek in. And I can vividly remember what it looked like. And I was like, that's really cool. And so then, given some of the sort of sexual trauma I had early in life, and given the somewhat emotionally incestuous relationship I had with my parents, um, I didn't, even though I had a lot of positivity around sex, I also had a lot of other stuff mixed up in there. And so when I was 14, I hadn't yet had the experience of making out with someone, of like hooking up and getting to second base or first base even. And my friends were starting to not only have that experience, but they were starting to have sex. And so I was 14, just a little past 14, and I was like, well, this is not acceptable. I need to have sex. Now that, I think, that
Why?
attitude.
Sorry. Why did you feel that? Why was it unacceptable? Why was
Well,
it something that needed to be done?
I think it has to do with this early sexualization, because what happened is I ended up turning into this kid. Like, I had a few experiences with older kids that were traumatic. And then I went on to be the older kid who would introduce the idea of, you know, the equivalent of playing doctor, right? And so I became like hypersexual. And it just seemed totally unacceptable that I hadn't actually had sex yet. And so, you know, I went to this party that I was going to sleep over at. It was like this outdoor, it was like being in the 70s. It was like a Woodstock party. It was like everyone just out in the grass smoking pot. And my mom made me promise I wouldn't drink, and she dropped me off. And I didn't. I smoked a bunch of pot, and I promised myself tonight's the night. And I saw the guy that I kind of had a crush on, and he was totally all up with some other girl. They were flirting, and he clearly was really into her. And I was like, damn it. And then she left, and I was like, all right. And I went and started engaging with him, and he's like, let's take a walk. And then we ended up in the back of his car. And the thing that I have to say about this guy is, while he did have a history of having sex with virgins, which, you know, is, I don't know, maybe problematic. And he was 17 and I was 14, maybe problematic. But what he did do is he asked for my consent.
Okay.
He said, do you want to do this? And that is why, for me, that guy will always have a slightly warm place in my heart, because he didn't do what other people did. He didn't. I don't feel that I was taken advantage of. I don't feel that I was raped. I was I was not drunk. Like, being high on pot is different from being drunk. So I was conscious to what was happening, and he knew that. And he asked for my consent. So, you know, and then it was over. And then it was like, okay, I did that. All right. Told a few people. And then, you know, it's like, all right, now that's done. And then, you know, the next time I had sex, and I talk about it in the book, and this is actually really important, and I'm saying it in every interview I do. There's a point in the book where I'm talking about safe sex and consent. And I tell a story about being 14 and this 20-something-year-old guy having sex with me when I was on LSD, drunk and high. And I also tell how I asked for him to use a condom, and he said no. And then I don't remember anything else from it. And when I wrote that, I was still, there was still this kind of denial that I had, because I did not consider myself a rape victim when I wrote this book. And when I went into the audio booth to record the audiobook, and I got to that part, I couldn't get through it. And all this emotion came up, and I had to process before I could go back and finish reading what was no longer true. I couldn't just change the book then. So I'll change it in the next, you know, I guess I'll change it in the next printing if I can, but I'm telling everyone that I can, like, look, I say that I'm not a rape victim, but I am. And luckily in the book, I say, well, I don't consider myself a rape victim or survivor. You may have had a similar thing happen, and it's your, you know, up to you to decide what rape is for you. And I say, that it wasn't consensual. I didn't call it rape, but I said it wasn't consensual. So that was my second sexual experience. And now that I'm actually processing it 23 years later, I think, it's devastating. What a devastating experience.
Yeah, I'm interested in, I mean, and this is purely kind of just speculative, of whether, of how much the early sexual experiences go on to sort of shape your sexuality in the first place. And I guess, you know, like you were saying, you had this first experience which was fine, and then this other experience not so much. I didn't have any kind of sexual trauma or anything, but I imagine that everyone sort of, as a teenager, you just rubbish at it, and it's just awkward and weird. And I don't know that anybody's at that age really having sex because it's something to indulge in, and they enjoy it, and it's coming from like a pure place. And so I'm just wondering what you feel it was that led you to be, because like you say, even though you had this bad sexual experience, you were raped, it didn't put you off sex, and you still went on to have a good sex life, and an experimental sex life. But at the same time, like the whole premise of this book is you were checking out, you wasn't fully into it. And so I'm just wondering what you think um, the cause of that was for you, and what maybe you think the cause of that is for the people you counsel.
Absolutely. And you'll notice you're getting a tour of my house right now, and it's because I I forgot to take some medication that I was supposed to, so I had to go and find it. So everybody who's watching the video is getting a little tour of my partner's condo. I apologize about that. Um, so anyway, or I don't. Welcome into my home.
It's like Cribs.
It's an inside look. Yes, I definitely 100% think that our early sexual and other experiences, just life experiences, even pre-birth, can shape what our relationships and sex look like.
Whoa, we can't just skim over that one now. So what do you mean there, even pre-birth?
Well, there's been a lot of science being done that I find just fascinating. Um, Something called epigenetics. Familiar with that?
Yes.
So basically, it's the idea that trauma can be passed down in DNA. And I'll tell you what, both sides of my family had mental illness, drug addiction, sexual abuse, suicide attempts, like both sides, like it's just riddled. And so there's no reason why I should have popped out um, healthy and well wired, you know? Not to mention that I grew inside my mom, who, even though she wanted me so much, I was very wanted baby. I was growing inside the womb of someone who had experienced a huge amount of trauma in her life. And so one of the things that trauma does on a psychological level is it leads you to believe that you're not lovable, that you're not good enough, that you're not really even worth being alive.
Did you feel
And
that like that?
yes, on some deep level. Now, I didn't really get in touch with that until I started meditating and really started getting into this psycho-spiritual evolution. But yes, 100%. 100%. And, you know, as I say in the book, you know, I grew up in a house of alcoholism and mental illness, and there was everything that goes along with that, right? The one thing I can say is that, like, I also got a lot of really great stuff. My parents were, I said in another podcast recently, I was raised by beautiful and terrible wolves. And I was this beautiful and terrible little wolf child as a result. Wild hair. You know, I didn't go to school. I went to 3 months of public school and a few years at this private hippie school and graduate high school. I was just a wolf child, you know? So at that time I didn't know, but now I look back and I'm like, well, of course, like I felt like I needed to just have sex with some guy in the back of his car to get it done, because on some level I attached being good enough, being lovable, being worthy with sex, because sex had, you know, because of my sexual traumas and because of the sort of early sexualization. There's pros and cons, you know, and the con of the sort of hypersexuality and the early sexualization is that I got love and worthiness and good enough tangled up with sexuality.
Yeah, I don't know if I think I'm a little bit older than you, but I don't know if I'm looking at this through sort of rose tinted specs, but I know that it's important to everybody to feel attractive and to, you know, want to be wanted. You know, I certainly felt that to some degree as a teenager. Um, but I think it's nowadays it seems to be in complete overdrive, that whole thing. I don't remember it mattering as much back in the 90s as a teenager to be good looking and that to be your whole world, and people just wanting, all they care about is other people liking them. I don't remember it being that intense for me back in the 90s. And I'm just wondering what your whether it might be a male female thing, but did you feel that as a teenager, that that's that sort of thing we see nowadays of girls just putting so much value on wanting to be physically attractive to the opposite sex, and
Or the
having,
same sex.
All
Or
the same sex, yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. First of all, you are not older than me, just so you know. um, uh, it was very different in the 90s. Um, uh, I think certainly people still dealt with issues of insecurity and issues of, feeling not pretty enough. I was I was lucky because what some of my trauma led to, instead of turning in on myself and thinking that I was ugly, it turned into arrogance. So I went through my teenage years just being very confident that I was very attractive. And some of that might have had to do with, like, my father was very vocal about how beautiful I was and very vocal about beautiful women in general. And I was sexualized at a young age. I had older men when I was 10, 11, 12 telling me how beautiful I was, telling me if only I was older. And so this was programmed in, and I was like, I knew I was attractive. But that doesn't really matter ultimately, right? It's not about the outsides, it's about the insides. So I think the inside issue was just as bad in some ways. In other ways, it has increased because with social media, um, and just with the speed at which everything moves, we're in the singularity right now. It's already happening, folks. It's like and that instant gratification that you get with a like, it's really shaped the culture in an interesting way. But you're going to find out about me. I like to look at the gift in everything. I like to look at what's positive in everything, not ignore the issues. But to me, what I also see is I see this movement of empowerment, of female empowerment, and of male empowerment. I see, people doing body positivity social media accounts. I see people talking about how they feel when they're moving through, a period of low self-esteem. So it's not just this like hyper um, um, physical, how you look physical thing. It's also, this is when I wish I had gone to school, because I know what I want to say, but I don't necessarily have the words. Like, there's these eloquent words that would state it so perfectly. But anyway, it's not just that. It's also the movements that have been built up within social media that are telling young girls and young boys, you are good enough, and you do deserve love, and you are beautiful no matter what you look like on the outside. And who's to say what's ugly or beautiful anyway? So I think it's happening on both ends. And I think we're seeing that in our culture in a really big way right now. We're seeing this sort of rise of the right, like alt, they call them the alt right, but fascist and Nazis. We're seeing that. And at the same time, we're seeing this like rising, like the Black Lives Matter, the women's movement that's going on right now, the sort of calling out of the sexual atrocities that are occurring, all of that, right? And so it's like, it's all of it. And that's how I work in life. It's non-dual. And with this big, movement of girls worrying about, doing like 75 selfies, there's also the movement of the girls that are going on and saying, these are my belly rolls, and I'm proud of them because I'm not starving myself anymore, right? And so it's both.
Yeah, I've got to say, I think that the only problem with it is it's I think for a lot of people the body positivity movement is it's a less convincing argument, and I speak from experience on this. I'm just turned 35. I'm getting dad bod like crazy. My metabolism's slowing down. I'm not as slim as I used to be. I don't look as good as I used to. My hair's falling out. I look like shit, right? And
I
the
think
whole
you look
thing,
very, I think you look very handsome.
yeah. Well, like you say, it's what you think. It's what you think that matters, isn't it? And I see similar accounts for guys and stuff like that, and I'm just not. I'm not convinced by that sort of thing at all. I don't know why I'm not really able to internalize it. I sort of come from the perspective that, yeah, I don't feel great about the way I look. So go do something about it. Don't just accept yourself the way you are. I mean, I don't know if that's. I'm just. I understand why a lot of people aren't convinced by it, and why the beauty movement and the body beautiful thing is a much stronger kind of force in social media. Um, but anyway, it's
Sure,
going to
sure.
take us off
No,
a whole.
no, 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 but just to speak to that real quick. So there's also the body positive movement that's not saying like we're going to eat French fries every day and never work out. Like the people I follow on social media who are in the body positive movement, no, they're not stick thin, but they're beautiful, curvy women who don't constantly diet and who are happy with their bodies, but also get exercise, do yoga, do these things, right? Like I am a big proponent for like, take care of this body. And if taking care of this body means that you're going to be a little heavier than like you would if you didn't give it some of the things it liked. Well, I just don't like, look, I'm an actor. And so I have a certain way that I need to appear when I'm filmed. And that requires me, when I'm preparing for a role, to make certain sacrifices about what I do and do not put into my body and the amount of exercise that I take, right? But if I wasn't an actor, if I was just a teacher, I'd probably be 20 pounds heavier.
Right.
And I'd be fine. I'd be fine with it. I'd be fine with it. But here's the thing. So my question for you is, or actually I'll put it in terms of me, going back to my story about realizing that was a rape. What brought that up for me, in addition to the audio book reading, was the Kevin Spacey thing. Because, and I don't generally read those articles. I get informed and then I'm informed. I don't want to fill my head with news. I just think news is really a very unhealthy thing for us. So I got the first bit of info. He's 26, the kid's 14, and he's really, really drunk. And the way the guy tells the story, you can tell Kevin Spacey's really drunk. And my immediate instinct, and I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but my immediate instinct was like, oh man, that was so long ago. And, you know, he was really drunk. And I sort of had a resistance to it. And I brought it up to a friend and she sort of read me the riot act. She was like, no, she's like, that's not okay. And here's why. And here's other instances that are already being reported. And I was like, holy moly. So I got drawn to one article. And this guy talking about Kevin Spacey, he was 14 when they began a sexual relationship. Kevin Spacey was in his 20s. And what Kevin Spacey said to him was, I've been drawn to you since you were 12, but you were too young. And the guy who's, giving the interview, telling the story, he said, and what, 14 isn't? And laughs. That's exactly what my abuser said to me. He said, I've liked you since you were 12. And I remember being 12. I remember being 12 and 13 and just loving the attention he gave me. So basically he groomed me for that moment in the field when I was 14 and on several different kinds of drugs. So I couldn't be open to that original story that came out because I was not in touch with that part of myself, because I hadn't opened up. I hadn't healed something. And so what I would offer to you is, when the inside job is continuing to be done, right? Which I know it is. You wouldn't be doing this podcast if you weren't committed to that. But like, as that self-love on the inside continues to deepen, I bet you have a different experience with those body positive accounts. That's my guess.
Possibly. I just, what's been interesting for me is I've kind of had a weird trajectory with my attitude toward sexuality. So as a teenager and leading up to being about 20 years old, I was okay with it. It was curious about it and did a little bit of it here and there. But I was shit to death of girls, scared to death of women. So my girlfriends all just we stumbled across each other and then, didn't have anyone else. So we sort of went out with each other, that kind of thing. But then when I started working in the sex industry around girls that are hypersexual, confidence goes through the roof. Self-consciousness just completely falls away, became very experimental, just didn't give a shit. So just up for anything. And what I'm finding now is even after I left that industry, that kind of psychology stuck with me. But like, yeah, now as I'm getting a little bit older and a little bit podgier and not as young and good looking as he used to be, I'm feeling that self-consciousness creeping back in, which is quite an interesting experience. But what I'm interested in, I'm interested in whether that idea of people and, kind of moving into the subject matter in your book now,
Mhm.
whether that's that idea of people checking out during sex and relying on fantasy to get off, or just not being present with the person that they're with. In your experience, talking to other people, is that always just a self-consciousness that's like a body consciousness? Does it tend to be trauma? What does it tend to be? What are the main reasons that people are being that way?
Well, I think it's both of those for sure, both trauma and body image stuff, which usually comes from some kind of trauma. But I also think it's kind of exactly what the story you just told, which is when you were in a culture and an environment where people were free with their sexuality and communicated about their sexuality and took joy in their sexuality, it was very easy for you to let go of that sense of insecurity.
Mm.
So our culture is basically a Puritan, totally sex negative culture. And and I am a fan of porn, but most porn is not ethical, and most porn is actually doing harm, and people are watching a lot of it. I don't know if it's doing harm, but it's not helping. If it's not ethical, to me, I don't think it's helping. There's this culture where everything is super sexualized, but it's also not allowed to be talked about.
Yeah,
Right?
so
You're not allowed to
if you
talk about
could
it.
expand on that a little bit, then. So, what do you mean specifically about a sex negative culture, apart from the porn aspect? We've done porn to death on this podcast.
Oh, yeah, yeah, sure, sure. Well, I mean, look at what happened. I mean, I'll just talk about my own country. Look at Trump. There's two things there. One is this sort of like hyper, sort of what some people would call toxic masculine, like really nasty perpetrator, abuser kind of mentality. And then on the other side, he's part of a political party that doesn't believe in sex education. They believe in abstinence, that doesn't believe in a woman's right to choose. They believe in limiting abortions completely. That you know that doesn't want people to be talking about sex. The interesting thing is, it's always the right that ends up coming out in these scandals with like really kinky sex activities, like because they're just so repressed, right? Because they're repressed on a level that's even deeper than the rest of the country. So this country right now is being run by a group of people who are sex negative. Then even if you are like, I find this in the spiritual community, there's all these people and they're spiritual and they're talking about spiritual awakening and they're talking about compassion and love, but if you bring up sex, they don't want to hear it. I had no Buddhist teacher who would blurb my book, and my book is a meditation spiritual awakening book that is based on the original teachings of the Buddha, and I could not get a Buddhist teacher to blurb it. The only one that would, and I had direct contact with them, the only one that would was one of my teachers, Shinzen Young, who doesn't necessarily consider himself a Buddhist teacher. Okay, so
Why why do you think that is? Because you sort of imagine that the people who tend to be of a spiritual nature are on the complete opposite end of the political spectrum.
no, it's not the case. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. The book just came out on Tuesday. My strong suspicion, and maybe, I mean, my strong suspicion is that I'm going to have a lot of anger coming towards me from the spiritual community. Because you know what I'm saying? I'm saying a quick a quickie with a stranger in the bathroom at a bar can be a spiritual experience. And they do not want to hear that.
Right.
Because what isn't spiritual? One of my teachers, Ajahn Shanti, says, spiritual compared to what?
Mm.
In my experience, there's nothing that's not spiritual. Again, spiritual is just a word, it's a concept, but what isn't spiritual?
Okay, so I'll tell you what. It's interesting. So let's ground that in a concrete example, and
I lost you there for a second. What did you say? Let's what?
let's kind of ground that in give it a put some meat on the bones. Give it a concrete example. So because I just know people are going to go, hang on a minute, right? I was with you up until that point. How can a quickie in a bathroom at a bar with a stranger, how can that be a spiritual experience in all seriousness?
Ooh. I'll tell you a story right now, a personal story. I'm happy to share it. Some point, okay, he wasn't a stranger. How explicit am I allowed to get on your podcast, by the
Oh,
way?
don't give a shit. Go for it.
All right. He wasn't a stranger, but he wasn't someone I knew. I'd never spent time with him. I never hung out with him. I just thought he was hot. And I basically let him know I wanted to give him a blowjob in the bathroom because I was going to enjoy that a lot. And so we kind of made out a little bit at the party and ducked in and out of corners and sort of warmed it up. And then after about an hour or so of that, he's like, want to go to the bathroom? I'm like, yeah. We go in the bathroom, give him a blowjob. I kind of think when I come out, he's gonna just kind of split, you know. I thought he'd kind of go off and do his own thing, right? Like it was a culmination of a series of conversations, and then it was going to end, and I was fine with that. I would have been fine if it wasn't that too. Like this is actually a friend of mine now who I quite love. But in any case, at that time, I didn't know him that well. But instead, when I came out, he said, "Wow, I've never had an experience like that." He's like, "I forgot who you were. I forgot that you were this, sexuality, mindfulness, spirituality teacher." And basically, it really shows. You were really there. You were really there, is what he said to me. I was like, damn straight I was, and I enjoyed every moment of it. And so not only was it a spiritual experience in some ways for him, in many ways, as he's reported, it was a spiritual experience for me because I don't have experiences that aren't spiritual at this point.
Okay, so
To him, it was spiritual because he was with somebody who was actually present.
yeah, I'm just wondering whether it's like you talking the build up to it. It sounded sort of animalistic. Do you know what I mean? It's very
Sure.
kind of
Yeah.
and I guess I don't know whether it's just playing with semantics, but I guess just on the face of it, it seems like those are two different experiences, two different drives going on. The animalistic drive and the spiritual drive. But are you saying that they can be one and the same, or intertwined, or
I'm saying they are one and the same. I'm
right?
saying
Okay.
I'm saying that, and look, I know I'm going into the deep end here, but look, my experience right now is that there is absolutely zero separation between you and I. And in that space of zero separation, I can completely fall in love with you, and I can completely fall in love with myself, and we can connect on a level that maybe we aren't even consciously aware of, right? And so that's sort of that's how I experience all this stuff. And I know I'm getting into territory people like, what the heck is this person talking about? And my book isn't like this, okay? Like, I have this issue where I'm doing these interviews and stuff, and I'm just like going off the rails a little bit, but I'm doing it because it's what the book is really for. The book is really to help people wake up, and the vehicle I'm offering is sexuality. And also, in order to wake up, you've got to heal. And so this book is about healing. And in order to wake up, you have to learn to get to know yourself and other people. And this book is about that too. But at the core of this book, it's about spiritual awakening. It's about our birthright to wake up, to get out of the matrix, and to see that we are not some fixed thing. We're not thoughts, we're not emotions, we're in no fixed location. And when that starts to become realized, life opens up in the most magical ways, and that includes sexuality. In the meantime, before all of that happens, right, before that awakening deepens to that level, we can 100% have a spiritual experience with sex by simply opening our eyes, taking our partner in, noticing the fear and the insecurity, the vulnerability in both of us, feeling it and allowing it and speaking it out loud, and then slowly moving forward, one touch at a time, in full honesty and presence. And anybody can do that. It's just practice.
So I suppose sort of digging into that scenario a little bit more, um, and applying this perspective to it. I guess you see, some people would hear that story and think, "Ugh, tacky,
Uh-huh.
blowjob in a bar." But I guess what you're saying is it's well, firstly, I guess you've got to be divorced from other people's opinions,
You do. And just to be clear,
and
it was actually a party. I don't actually give blowjobs in bathrooms at bars because I think that's illegal. So I don't recommend doing that. Do it at your own risk. This was at a party. Okay, sorry. Come back to what you were saying.
yeah, and but also I guess it's going to be divorced from circumstance as well, isn't it? So maybe it
Yeah.
does, it doesn't matter where you are, how you dressed, kind of what the situation is, apart from a legal perspective, like you
Right,
just
right.
pointed out. But it doesn't matter about the circumstance so much, and it doesn't matter what other people are going to think of it. It's about what you. It's about the interaction between you and the other person, which sounds quite kind of obvious on the face of it. But I guess just before I start delving into this mindful sex thing properly, I'm wondering if in that same scenario, if that other person is checked out, does that ruin the experience for you? Is the experience for you sort of relying on the other person being there with you, or can you have a sexual experience even though the other person's not having the same experience?
Okay, so yes and no. So me personally, I don't have sexual interactions with people who can't show up and be present with me. I'm not expecting that they're present. I'm not expecting that they're at the same experience level as I am with all of this, but I am expecting them to show up and be vulnerable and be present. And if they can't do that, then I'm not having a sexual interaction with them. But that wasn't the case not that long ago. Not that long ago, I was still interacting sexually with people who weren't actually present. And I did still have a spiritual experience. Now, in some of those cases, what the spiritual experience was what it revealed about me. It revealed to me that I want to have this like mindful sex, but some part of me is scared of that vulnerability and intimacy. So I choose somebody who can't do it with me. And then I can be like, oh, I'm so spiritual and I'm so evolved and this person isn't. And it makes me feel bigger and more powerful. And it cuts that vulnerability and intimacy off at the knees. And I don't have to deal with that. But now that's not the case, because you keep doing the work, you write a whole book about it, you're gonna come to some realizations. And so now I'm incredibly picky about the people, not only and not picky, I'm very mindful about the people that I bring into my space, whether that's platonic or otherwise, because as a teacher, I do a lot of output. And so when I'm in my personal time, I want to be with someone who can really like be in space with me and we can hold space together. This actually comes into something I talk about in the book, which is, let's say you want to start having mindful sex, but your partner is like, that sounds like BS to me, right? What do you do? And I outline it in the book what you can do. But I'll just kind of hit some of the topics, some of the areas. So your sexuality is a relationship you have with yourself, just like your mental health, right? So for our mental health, we know we need to eat the right foods, we need to get outside in the sunlight, we need to take the right medications if that's the case, we need to see the right practitioners and therapists, right? And our sexuality is the same thing. We need to engage with it regularly. And that can look like mindful masturbation. That can look like getting sheets that feel sexy. That can look like watching ethical porn. It can look like reading erotica. It can look like just talking about sex or reading a book like mine. We need to always be engaging. And the idea that our partner can't be enough to keep us from diving into that. I had a sex therapist say to me years ago when I was in a sexless relationship I didn't like that I was in a sexless relationship. He said, you need to allow your sexuality to blossom, even if his isn't. And
Hmm.
that was some of the best advice I ever got. Now that relationship ended, because I did do that. I allowed my sexuality to blossom with myself. And in doing that, the relationship just no longer worked because we were in different, water meets its own level and we were in different places. This is a beautiful man with all kinds of great qualities and in some ways more far along than me in certain ways. But in this way, we just didn't match up anymore. And I have a high priority on sexuality, so that doesn't work for me. So you can 100% be engaging with and nurturing your own sexuality while you're in a relationship with someone who isn't interested. But what's going to happen is you're going to start becoming more and more uncomfortable with their level of shutdown. The more you wake up, the more you open up, it's going to feel more and more incongruent. And then they're either going to need to step in and start to do their part, or you're going to move on.
Right. So, okay, let's sort of get into the how-to now, I guess.
Okay.
And we've this term mindfulness has come up a lot on this podcast. It's kind of been mentioned briefly here and there. Last episode with Mark Freeman, we talked about it at the most length, but even that was only a couple of minutes. So if you could kind of give people an idea of what it actually means to be mindful.
Yeah,
And then
absolutely.
and then sort of we'll apply that to how to be mindful during sex.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I imagine people are sort of might be listening to this and thinking, well, hang on a minute, I don't get what you're saying. Like, I'm there during sex. What do you mean? Like, there's nowhere else to be, kind of thing. It doesn't get any more kind of up close and personal. So let's sort of pass that out a little bit for people.
Okay, great. Just to speak to what you just said, though, I just want to throw a little anecdote in there. Imagine this. Imagine if right now you are only experiencing 5% of the pleasure that's available to you during sex. And then it got turned up to 100%. Either quickly or maybe slowly over time. There's a big difference. And there's no denying it. Once you have that experience of actually having embodied sex, and then you continue on that journey to everything that entails, I mean, it's like I'm speechless. It's like there's just no compare. It's day and night.
Okay, well, I've got a quick question there then, which might sound like a stupid question, but I don't think it is. How does somebody know if they're having bad sex or low quality sex or 5% sex? Let's call it that.
Well, here's the thing. I'm not calling it bad sex or low quality. And even saying 5%, it gives it some sort of value. It's kind of like, that movie Lucy that came out with what's her name, Scarlett Johansson.
Mm-hmm.
She becomes more and more evolved until she just turns into like nothingness. That very much is capturing the process of spiritual awakening. So if we put that in the context of sexuality, it's like, of course you don't know. Just like Neo didn't know he was in the Matrix. You have to wake up. And only then do you know. I didn't know until I knew. And so what I'm offering is an invitation. I'm offering an invitation to this new paradigm. And it's going to happen, in stages. And there's going to be work to do, but it's also going to be fun and it's also going to be sexy. And it's like, it's totally worth it. Neo might have woken up with like the hole in his head and shaved head and all skinny and blah, but eventually he ended up, I don't know, what happened? He like became one with the aliens. I don't remember, but like life got a lot bigger and more exciting. Right?
Okay. So perfect. So let's turn people into sexual Neos. Is it? I'm not really that familiar with the Matrix. So how are we doing this?
Okay, so what I'm going to do, just because it's easier for my brain, is I'm just going to read what I say mindfulness is in my book. So this is in chapter 2, the Mindfulness Manual: Obstacles, Frequently Asked Questions, and Tips. Mindfulness is the practice of greeting all experiences with acceptance and curiosity. It allows you to know what you are feeling when you are feeling it, and what you are thinking when you are thinking it. Mindfulness opens up a small space before acting on a thought. It's a path that allows you to stop resisting what is and embrace the present moment. Being mindful helps you to create a new relationship with your emotions, mind, and the world at large. So that's my sort of definition of mindfulness in the book. And every teacher, they put it in their own words. We're all kind of saying the same thing, right? Be here now. So my teacher Shinzen has this thing of pain times resistance. He's a mathematician. Pain times resistance equals suffering. If you take out the resistance, it's just pain.
Okay.
So when we look at sexuality and we look at, there's so much suffering happening in the realm of sexuality on so many levels, right? And so the first thing we need to do, and let's just talk on the micro and the personal level, is we need to look at the resistance. What is my resistance to considering that it's possible that mindfulness could change my sex life for the better? Because some of the people listening right now are thinking that. They're like, this is BS, you know?
Yeah.
What is she talking about? And it's like, that's where I want you to start. I want you to be like, okay, well, where is that resistance? Oh, wow, there's like a knot in my stomach. There's tension in my chest. My jaw's getting tight. I'm sort of like shaking my leg. And my mind is saying, oh, she's full of it. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's a slut who gives blowjobs in the bathroom, right? Like that's whatever else is going on in the mind, right? And that's what I want you to notice. In a curious and accepting way, notice the sensations in your body and notice that there's thoughts in your mind. That's step one, just to deal with the resistance that's coming up, right? Then the next thing I often suggest to people, once they get past that resistance phase, is I have people do mindful masturbation. And I just have a simple practice. You set a timer, you make a comfortable space, maybe it's your bed. You put away computers, devices, and toys just for this exercise. I'm not against porn or toys, but for this exercise, you put all that away. You set a timer for 15 minutes and you start by just feeling your body without doing anything, just noticing the sensations in your body. And for a lot of people, fear and resistance and even grief will come up, right? Because we have a lot of damage in the area of sex and sexuality in our bodies. And so we start by just noticing what's happening in the body and maybe inviting some relaxation, softening the jaw, softening the stomach, softening the pelvic floor. The opposite of a Kegel, just release, soften. Okay. And then we just start by it's as simple, just touch your face, you know, touch your neck, touch yourself in a way that feels good. Maybe it's very gentle with like fingertips, or maybe you like, you know, maybe like more, maybe you like the feeling of a little more of a, you know, pressure, firm hold, right? So you start to just explore your body from really every part of your body, but I would say you just avoid the genitals at first. You just explore everything. You just feel it and you notice what it feels like. You notice what feels good and what doesn't. And when you notice pleasure, when you're aware of pleasure, you just start to tune into that. What does that feel like in the body? And you notice how the mind just wants to pull you right away into something else, right? And any of us who've dealt with anxiety and depression or any other mental health issues know that the mind can just be such a prison, right? It's just like such a prison. Like, I know what it is to be in that prison and think the only option is either to get blackout drunk or to kill myself. I know what that is, okay? So I get it. I've been there. But when we're doing this mindful masturbation and we start to get pulled into the thoughts, we just let them be there. Do not try to quiet your mind. That's the worst meditation direction that I could ever hear. We're not going to quiet our minds. Our minds might settle down as we practice, but our minds are there to create thought. That's part of what they do, right? So you don't try to quiet it. You just let those thoughts come and go, but you return your attention to your body and the sensation of your hands on your own body, right? And then after a few minutes, when you've sort of acclimated to this new thing, You can start to touch the genitals, but what I invite people to do is not to just go straight to your go-to. Like if you're a woman and your go-to is to put a pillow down and to kind of hump the pillow, which actually a lot of women, that's how they orgasm and that's how they started from a young age, then you're going to put the pillows away. We're not going to do that. You're just going to start to explore whatever genitals you have. You're going to explore them with your hands. And you're going to keep breathing and relaxing. And you're going to find what feels good. What happens if I don't do the thing I always do? And I just sort of touch a little differently. And then a lot of people need fantasy to climax. And so the point of this exercise is not to have a climax. You might not. The point of this exercise is to start to tune into what pleasure feels like in the body and what sexual pleasure feels like in the body, and to start to create this mindful relationship with your body, with your sexuality, with yourself. And so when you start to go to those fantasies, which I had like one fantasy that I used for like, I mean, years. It's only
I've got
recently that
to ask what that was. The
what it
one
was.
that you used for years,
Sure,
yeah.
sure. I'm happy to share it. So as you've noticed, like I'm very forthcoming with this stuff, and I do that not to shock, not to sensationalize, but I do it for the same reason I did hospice work. I'm comfortable with death and dying, and I am uniquely skilled and qualified to help someone die, to be with someone while they're dying. I am also someone that is very comfortable with sex and sexuality, and my mission is to peel back that veil so that people can start being with sexuality in a new way, so that we can start healing ourselves and we can have a better world. That's like the kind of big picture. And so I don't tell the blowjob in the bathroom story because I want to be like, I tell it purely because I'm saying we can talk about this stuff and we should talk about it, right? And people that don't want to hear about this, I suggest you put a trigger warning at the top of this episode, because some people aren't going to want to hear this, especially the rape stuff. I think it's important that you prepare people for that. In any case, my fantasy, my fantasy my fantasies were very violent. It was generally a dark alley and a stranger who was forcing me to have sex, and usually it involved anal sex, and that's the thing that would make me come. And there is nothing wrong with rape fantasy. Many women have them, and it's completely normal and healthy. That does not mean you.
Sorry, I used to wear the rape fantasy. I used to wear that all the time from the girls. I always thought it was a bit weird, but the distinction that they seemed to make for me was that even in a rape fantasy, I don't know if it's the same for you, but it tended to be that it was not so much that, like in real life, where you've just got this fucking psychopath who's got kind of malevolent intent. They said it was more to do with the fact that they were just, the guy couldn't help himself with them, that they were completely sort of irresistible to the guy, and that he just had to do it whether she liked it or not. And also the other distinction was that in a rape fantasy, it's your fantasy, so you're still, even though you're not in control in the fantasy, you're still completely in control in a godlike fashion. I don't know if that was the same for you, but that's what it seemed to be.
Totally. There's this thing of not having to, like, I've always been a very sort of strong personality. I've always had a lot of masculine energy. I've sort of come into my feminine energy over the years, hence like my red lips and stuff like that. But, I was always very controlled. Growing up in an alcoholic home teaches you to be very controlled. And I was very controlled in all areas, which is also why I like to drink, because I could let that go a little bit. And so for me, and I was always kind of a leader. Like I was generally the one telling someone else how to do something, including sex. And so for me, in a fantasy like that, you don't have to be in control, right? But as you said, in this godlike way, you are. So I take no issue with rape fantasy. I wish more women would talk openly about it so that less women would feel ashamed, and because that sexual shame is so unnecessary. But I will tell you this, and this is not a statement around your personal rape fantasy to any women who are listening. This is just me. This is my experience. I had the rape fantasy, and I also really liked to I like to be hurt. I like to be physical pain. And because I drank a lot, you know, it would get out of control, right? So I have some scars, like, you know what I mean? Like, it was, and I needed to be drunk to ask for it, because I wasn't comfortable saying, like, can you squeeze my nipple really hard, or can you slap my ass? Like, I wasn't comfortable using that language unless I was drunk. And so those were things I liked for many years. And even after I stopped drinking, and even after I started getting into mindful sex, I still enjoyed those fantasies, and I still enjoyed, you know, not always, but some sort of light BDSM stuff. I gotta say, in the last couple of years, neither of those are true for me anymore. I don't have a rape fantasy anymore. And as far as pain, very rarely is that what I want. Every once in a while, there's room for that, right? But it's not my go-to. It's not the thing that gets me off anymore. Because that would be the thing that would immediately get me off. Not the case anymore. And I think it has some, for me personally, not for anyone else, but for me personally, I think that has to do with healing sexual trauma. For me personally.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think, just, and again, I'm not going to make any broad kind of recommendations or anything, but see, I used to know a lot of girls that were into quite violent stuff. I remember one girl, she liked to be cut with like Stanley knife blades and stuff during sex.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it seems that the implication here is you're almost saying that after this kind of sexual awakening, that sort of stuff went away. So
it wasn't, I mean, there have been, the awakening is a continuous process. I'm just saying the last few years.
Right. I'm just wondering if you for girls that have got those kind of fantasies, or that are actually playing those scenarios out, even if they're enjoying them, or they just think they're enjoying them, would you recommend people take a look at that stuff?
I would not recommend that you pathologize your sexual tastes.
Okay.
I would recommend that you explore them. So I wouldn't say explore them because there's something wrong with you because daddy touched you. You know, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying just be open to mindfully exploring everything, including your sexual fantasies. There's nothing wrong. Look, I mean, every once in a while, I still play around with, you know, I'll still, there still will be some of that stuff, and it feels totally clean, and you know, it's just not very common anymore. But I don't think that everyone that has a rape fantasy or likes to do like knife play has some horrible trauma that they haven't dealt with. I just really can't make that statement. But I think no matter what it is, whether your fantasy is dressing up in furry costumes, I don't care, whatever it is that you're doing that gets you off, why not get mindful about it? Why not explore it? Why not understand yourself more deeply?
Yeah,
Whether
well, I
you
mean,
keep wearing the furry costumes or not.
when yeah, furries, that's an episode all of its own, that one.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I wasn't just going for sort of gratuitous sort of word porn when I asked you to share the fantasy that you had, because you said it was a consistent fantasy. It was one that lasted. I've got fantasies that have been 10 years old, maybe even older than that, that are still.
Let me ask you this: have you played any of them out?
Not no, the top my top three. I've not played them out, unfortunately.
Okay, well, I've played mine out. I've done rape fantasy and all of that, rape play, you know, and it's really empowering to bring your fantasies to life. Of course, you have to have, you know, willing, consensual partners, but there's somebody for everybody. Whatever your kink is, there's someone out there that will fulfill that fantasy with you.
Well, what I'm interested in is when you were talking, sort of bringing this back to this idea of mindful masturbation,
Mm-hmm.
and just hearing you talk about it, I'm not convinced that if I tried this, I just don't think it'd work. And like say, you relied on fantasy for so long, and I think most people do, and I can't imagine. I'll be honest, the idea of just sort of lying there touching myself sounds boring.
Yeah, it would be
And
at first. It would be at first.
so when somebody's trying this, sort of from a very practical standpoint, how do you know when you're being mindful and when you're not being mindful? Is there a way of articulating that switch between the two and spotting the point at which you're no longer being mindful and also being able to spot when you are being mindful?
So let's just do a little exercise right now, okay? Because yes and no. So right now, I notice, and I hope this is okay. I notice like it's slightly uncomfortable, the territory we're in for you, right? Like slightly uncomfortable, a
You know what?
little
It's
bit.
the only reason it's uncomfortable for me is I've sat in cars with escorts for 10 years. I've been
Yeah,
way worse conversations than this. I'm
yeah, yeah,
just I'm worried about the listeners. If this was a
yeah,
private
yeah,
conversation,
yeah.
we'd
No
be going
worries.
down some right rabbit holes. But
Okay,
yeah,
so
a little bit on their behalf. Yeah,
right. Okay, so good. So I hope you keep this in the interview because it's important. So you are having
of
an
course.
experience while we're talking, you're having a mental and emotional experience, right? Now I'm trained to see that. So I know exactly what's going on because I'm trained. It's not magical. It's just something I've practiced for a long time. So I can see that, that yeah, I can see it. Okay. Like I know where in your body is lighting up. So I just want you to put some attention on where you feel that discomfort.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
You feel that
Yeah. There's a physicality to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you notice that. And then I want you to just notice how right now probably the mind is a little bit frozen, right? Because we're bringing attention to it, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So that's mindfulness, what you just did. Now I just want you to feel your butt on the seat.
Yeah.
There it is. That's mindfulness. That's it. That's all it is.
Okay.
Just being present with what's happening in the moment. So if you're practicing mindful masturbation, and honestly, I mean, I'm like now like the mindful sex expert, but I'm not even a big fan of the word mindful because it's been so sort of like butchered at this point. But whatever. Mindful masturbation. If you and I expect you to try this later on and report back. Please. I'm not joking. What I want you to do is I want you to be aware of how you feel and what's happening in your mind while you're doing it and notice that and allow that and then come back to just what your fingers or your hands feel like on your body and then notice, oh, I'm getting bored. I will
Mm.
guarantee you that boredom is actually just resistance because it's scary to really just be with ourselves because our culture does not support that. And so even when you were in like a very sexually free and open environment, this exercise probably still would have been uncomfortable because it really is about just being with yourself.
Yeah, it always would have been, if I'm honest. Yeah, it's it's the idea of, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, but the idea of applying this to a sexual interaction with another person, fine, but by
Hmm.
yourself, that's
Interesting. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, look, this is just one suggestion I make, but I do think for you personally, the fact that the resistance comes up around doing it with yourself, that's the place to go. That's the work. Wherever the
yes.
resistance is, that's where the blockage is. That's where the emotional and mental kind of shutdown is. Right.
Oh, of course. I mean, that's universal with sort of any sort of anxiety. It's wherever you feel the resistance, whatever it is you're anxious about, that's the place to go to. The obstacle is the way. It's breaking down those barriers that enables you to grow and feel less anxious, or not less anxious, but braver. That's how you conquer any sort of anxiety. But
So you start to form a new kind of relationship with the anxiety.
yes, yes. So okay, so let's can we give so we've got a couple, say we've got a couple listening, and they're like, well, again with the masturbation, can we get to the couple stuff?
Sure.
um
Sure. So the first thing I would say
is
to any oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. You asked me the
yeah,
question.
I was just wondering if is there a particular sort of exercise or routine, or so a couple of my listeners, this is a strange image, two of my listeners in bed together listening to this podcast. I don't think that ever happens, but on the off chance that it is there something that a couple can sort of get right to be practicing this?
Yeah. So first of all, and I want you make sure you remind me about this when we stop recording. I have a link for 2 weeks free for an app called Simple Habit. It's a meditation app. I think it's the best meditation app. And I have a whole mindful sex series on there, including meditations to use while you're having sex. So remind me, and I'll give you that code so that your listeners can get 2 weeks free. And if they don't want to do the mindful sex stuff, that's fine. There's a bunch of other cool meditation stuff, including stuff for depression and anxiety and insomnia and all of that. I have a morning anxiety meditation I have, because I know a lot of times people wake up with it in the morning. I offer you that. But then, okay, so you're a couple. Most likely, because most couples I come in contact with, most likely you're not really being fully honest with your partner about what you want. And the main reason for this is because you're not being fully honest with yourself, because you feel there's something inherently wrong with you. And so we start with love. Everything comes back to self-love. Everything, right? And so can we be with ourselves, with our desires and our wants and our needs? And if we can do that, then we can start to talk to our partner about it. You know, there are just so many relationships that would be 20 times better if they would just tell each other what they wanted. I actually have a Madonna quote in my book. And is this like kosher to like refer to my book while we're doing this? Or is this like...
Of course, do it. Go for it.
Okay. I'm just like, is this like someone like book quoting themselves? Anyway, I have a quote that says, "A lot of people are afraid to say what they want. That's why they don't get what they want." Madonna. And it's true. It's true. So that's the number one thing. Sit down and have a real conversation with your partner. And if you're not capable of doing that, then sit down with yourself and learn some self-soothing.
Yeah, okay. So this is interesting. So I would say that, not an official statistic, but maybe 60 to 70% of all men that are using escorts, booking escorts, the number one reason they're doing that, this is guys in relationships, is, oh God, it's so common that you've got a guy who is married, kids, he loves his wife. His wife is amazing. She's, you know, like his perfect partner. But there's either one thing she won't do sexually, or the sex life is just, there's off. There's a reason. There's a hole that's being filled. That's a terrible analogy. That by by booking an escort. And what I find interesting about that in relation to what you're talking about now is, it's very often the case that the guy hasn't even maybe asked his wife to shared this part of his sexuality with his wife, and he's so ashamed of it, so embarrassed by this one thing, that he would rather put his marriage and his family on the line, his reputation. You know, by doing what he's doing, he's risking his marriage, he's risking losing his kids, he's risking losing his job, possibly through, you know, getting a bad reputation. He'd rather do that than share this aspect of his sexuality. So, and I imagine the barrier is even bigger for women. The kind of anything that's sort of a bit out there, niche, bizarre, whatever you want to call it, that's usually attached to men. Let me tell you, I know women are just as bad as men, but
just as good, I would say.
Or just as good, as good. But that, like I say, that barrier is so high and thick that, how do you get through that? And like you're saying, this is your partner, the love of your life, but still rather put everything on the line than have that other person learn this thing about you. How do we get through that?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's why I'm a meditation teacher. That's why I'm so passionate about teaching people to meditate, because that's one of the ways you get through it. You start to understand yourself in a new way, and you also get help. You get coaches. I mean, I coach people. You know, I'm a intimate sexuality and intimacy guide, or you get a therapist. You know, you start addressing the actual issue, which is that you feel not good enough and unlovable. And therefore, that comes out in all kinds of ways, including the thing that happens where, this sort of virgin whore thing, like, I don't want to tell my wife that I want to fuck her in the ass because then she's going to be some dirty whore. And I want her to be, she's the mother of my children. She kisses my children with that mouth, whatever, right?
Yeah, I've
Which
heard that one. Yeah.
is just total crap, but it's our culture, it's the culture we're in. And so we're trying to, I want to be part of this conversation to change that culture. So I think it makes a lot of sense that people would put their family and their marriage and all that on the line, because that's how deep the problem is. That's just how deep the problem is. That's how disconnected we are from our sexuality as a culture, and Western and otherwise. So I mean, I believe in just telling the truth, even though it's going to feel horrible at first. And the reason why a meditation practice is so powerful is because when you learn to observe thoughts and emotions, and you realize you are not your thoughts and your emotions, and you start to have some space around your mental and emotional experience, you then know that feeling uncomfortable or embarrassed or ashamed or being rejected or even being ridiculed is not going to kill you. It's just a feeling, it's just a thought, and that's it. Totally impermanent. So the meditation comes in to give you that space so that you can go to your husband or your wife and say the thing. And let's say, worst case scenario, they say, no way, what the hell's the matter with you? You have such a sense of self-love and mindfulness towards your thoughts and emotions that doesn't need to destroy you. You might question your marriage at that point. You might need to start couples therapy because clearly your partner has some issues that need to work out, but it doesn't need to make you suffer. And so self-soothing is a huge part of what I teach couples to do. And it's something that really became impressed upon me by Dr. Snarch in his book, Passionate Marriage. And he talks about self-soothing being really important, because if you can soothe yourself, which most of us can't, which is why we're addicted to everything we're addicted to. But if you learn to soothe yourself, then you can really do anything. It's like a superpower. You can try new
Yeah.
things. You can have those conversations.
Yeah. Again, I will say that I think just from experience talking to so many girls over the years, my advice to guys, in particular guys that are sort of worried about this, is you would be surprised what a lot of girls are willing to try. It's if you sit around waiting for her to suggest it, you're going to be waiting a long time, because I find that girls like to have someone to blame their mischief on. And I think,
Unless you're dating me, because I'm the one that's like, let's open our relationship, let's go to a sex party, let's get me tied up and get something in every hole, you know what I mean, like whatever. Like,
yeah,
that's me. I know that
yeah,
maybe most women, but the thing is I think inside most women, if they were really allowed to access their sexuality, it wouldn't necessarily look like mine, but it would look really different. I don't think women aren't encouraged and they aren't allowed.
yeah. I think part of it is sort of, when you are just honest about what you want from your partner, and I'm talking specifically like male to female. I think from the female perspective, that's very much like you stepping into your masculine and being and leading the woman and helping her, being responsible for helping her open up sexually as well. Again, I don't know if you agree with that. I'm going off.
No, I think it's beautiful. I love that you're going there. So I tend to agree, though I do think that men can have more feminine and women can have more masculine. But usually what I come across, and in same-sex relationships as well, or gender non-conforming, non-binary, whatever you are, whatever you identify with, there tends to be at one time or another more of a traditional masculine or feminine happening. And that can be fluid and it can switch up, right? But if in the moment we're aware of what we're inhabiting and we're willing to inhabit it and to ask for the other person to inhabit the polar opposite, then this polarization becomes this really beautiful, pleasurable sexual thing. And to speak to what you just said, yes, most women that I talk to, most heterosexual women I talk to, or bisexual women, women who have sex with men, more often than not in relationships, they want the man to be more aggressive and dominant in bed.
Yep.
And the men are unfortunately, they've been sort of emasculated in a way and told that their masculinity is wrong or bad or dangerous. And so they're tiptoeing, and the women are taking the lead and feeling resentful. And then they stop having sex. Now, this is a generalization, but it is something I see a lot. So I'm not saying this is true for everyone, but there is a truth to this.
No, you know what? I mean, this sounds like a bit of a tacky story, but I remember being sat round a table in McDonald's at it's probably like 4 o'clock in the morning. Me and about 6 or 7 escorts, and they were talking about this idea of masculinity. And one of the girls said, because they were all complaining that they couldn't find guys to be with and have sort of open sexual relationships with, and that was why a lot of them, that job was kind of an excuse to explore the sexuality. And I was like, I don't buy that at all, because these girls are all stunning, beautiful girls. It's like, you can't get men. And she said, I didn't say that. She said, there's plenty of guys out there, but there's hardly any men left. And then in chorus, in unison, all the girls were like, mm-hmm. And it was like, interesting little insight there, that again, generalizations, but that wanting that masculine energy in a relationship, not just a guy, but a masculine man. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and I hear the same. I hear the same thing, and I think I'm all about I'm all about talking about the things that people are scared to talk about. So I talk about this stuff, and it's tricky, right? Because as a culture, women have been abused and repressed, and controlled, and all of that. So when we start talking about, well, we have to get into our feminine and men need to get in their masculine, it can get tricky. And I know that, and I respect that. I really do. But I will say, one of the reasons why women are not finding partners that are satisfying to them in that way is because on some level, they're not open to it. On some level, there is a fear or a resentment towards masculinity, and that needs to be addressed. So, and this goes every way. Like, again, we're talking in generalizations, but there's generalizations for a reason. In order to be held in the masculine, in this traditional sense, you need to inhabit the feminine. And, when we've been traumatized and repressed and all this stuff, we build up a very strong armor. I mean, I used to have a shaved head, combat boots, jeans, and black tank tops, and that's what I wore, and leather jacket. And that was my uniform. I did not show any sort of feminine. Now, as I've gotten older and as I've healed and grown, my natural expression has to become more feminine. That doesn't mean it's everyone's, but it's everyone, but that's been mine, right? And in doing so, I went from attracting a very, very feminine energy men to attracting very masculine energy men. And there are definitely, I have several options today if I wanted, you know what I mean? Like, they are out there, but we need to be able to see them. And it's the same thing, like, it's this idea of water meeting its own level. It's like, this is a little bit going off, but on topic, but if you're in a relationship and you're deciding, should I stay or should I go? Oh, they're so bad. They're so horrible. They're so this, they're so that. Should I stay? Should I go? I don't know. Well, you know what the answer is? You work on yourself. You start addressing in yourself what you're not satisfied in the other person. You clean your side of the street. You wake up. You evolve. You delve into all of your sexuality and your communication, your trauma. And then one of 3 things will happen. Your partner will not be willing and will drag their heels, and you will leave easily, because the water level will have changed. Or 2, your partner will grow, but you guys will grow in different ways and you'll leave because the water level has changed. Or 3, your partner will grow with you, and you guys will get to have deeper and more meaningful intimacy and connection. And so it's always going to come back to like, it's within ourselves. So if you don't have a satisfying sex life, it's not about all the people who aren't satisfying you. It's about you.
Yeah, I especially think, yeah, in those instances where you've got somebody who's in a relationship, which they feel like everything in the relationship is perfect, but there's just this one aspect that they're kind of fearful of coming forward about. I think it's probably safe to say that if you connect in all those other ways, there's a pretty high chance that even if you don't connect 100% on this other thing, that at least the other person's going to be understanding. You know, it's unlikely that if the relationship is that great, that one confession of a bit of a weird sexual fantasy or whatever, you know, she's going to pack up and take the kids with her just like that. So
Yeah, I
um
mean, look, people can have immediate reactions, but that's just human. And then you kind of settle down. And here's the thing, like there are so many options. There are endless options. It's like if you have something you really want to explore and your partner doesn't, well, there's one thing might be, well, we can't explore that, but let's explore this instead. Or it might be, well, we can't explore that together, but I'm comfortable with you exploring just that with someone else. Or and on, right? We have these very sort of solidified ideas of what a relationship, a romantic relationship is, but actually it can be so many things. It can look so many ways. And we need to like break this self-imposed mold that we're in around like what it's supposed to look like and what's right, and actually just be our human selves and ask for what we want and explore and be open to all the endless possibilities that there are for us, sexually and otherwise.
okay, one final quick question, and then I'm
Yeah.
going to run my quick fire questions past you and we'll wrap this up.
Okay. All right.
It's to do with the what do you call them, the Tinder generation, or I don't know, the people that are kind of on dating websites at the moment. Now, nothing against dating websites or anything, but in the running the mental health support group, it was very common that people were using Tinder to have quick hookups with people, and when they were being completely honest about it, it's because they were, you know, the social life was lacking, or they just find themselves stuck at home on a Friday night and they can't bear to just be with themselves. They need to go be with somebody. And I'm wondering what your advice for those people would be in this mindfulness sense. Whether is it better for somebody who's sort of in that mode where they're caught sleeping around and having these awkward one night stands and they're not really satisfied and getting anything out of it? Are they better to apply the mindfulness to the being stuck at home and struggling to deal with that? Or is it possible for them to go out and turn these negative sexual experiences into more positive ones through mindfulness, even though they can't necessarily guarantee that the other person's going to be of the same mindset and mindful as well?
Yeah, I think both can be true. I don't think there's a better. I mean, what I would do personally is I would deal with the feelings of loneliness and isolation and social anxiety and all of that. That's just me though. Like that's what I would do because that's the root. And so I like to go to the root. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with taking the practice out into the world, right? And in fact, it's a great thing to do. I'd recommend you do that anyway with sex and with anything. Um, so and you also want to address the judgment, like the idea, like I recently told a student he had to put up an online dating profile. And he's like, what are you even talking about? You're my spiritual teacher. I'm like, yeah, and this is what I'm spiritually advising you to do. because for him that's going to be the edge. For him that's going to be a challenge. That's the area to work, you know. And so I think, look, I have an OkCupid profile and it says I'm looking for friends and community, and I say multiple times, do not, and you have to be really clear as a woman on those apps, and even when you still get a lot of silly stuff. But for my profile, it's just like, not looking for dating, only message me if we're 95 and up percent match. if you message me, tell me what you're interested in a friend or community, and so and I've actually met some really awesome people that way who are still in my life. And some of them there was sexual stuff with, some of them there wasn't, but like, so I think dating apps can actually be used in a really positive way, whether it's dates and sex or whether it's friendship. And again, I think it's our perspective. I think if we're going into it like, oh, I suck so bad that I have to get on a dating profile, or if you're going in there like with this sort of compulsive like grasping at, I need to be with someone, well, then it's going to be an unhealthy experience for you, probably. If you go into it with an attitude of fun and curiosity and the desire to actually connect, then it's going to be that. You know what I say? I said, if you don't follow my instructions in my profile, I will block your message, because that just keeps things simple for me. And I'm perfectly nice about it, but yeah, that's the way and I think anything, social media, all of it, I think it all can be used for good. It's just about how we're thinking about it, and are we being mindful? Are we addressing our thoughts and our emotions? And are we willing to offer ourselves love?
Okay. Right, Jessica, I'm going to run these quick fire questions past you.
Okay.
The first one is, have you got any book recommendations for people, either on this topic or just anything else you feel would be of value? And but I will include your book, a link to that in the show notes. That's Good Sex, How to Get Off Without Checking Out.
Good sex.
That's the one.
Good sex, getting off without checking out. Yeah.
That's it. Just was there a reason you went for good sex instead of great sex or any other kind of sex?
Well, my first publisher came up with that title, and I was just happy that it wasn't mindful sex. So I was like, all right, let's do it. I was just happy
Right.
to
Okay.
have mindful in the title. I think good, the other reason why I like good sex is because it leaves room for continuous evolution.
Mm.
Which is
Okay.
what we're doing here. Nobody's graduating. Nobody's going to be a good sex graduator. You know what I mean? Like graduate, graduate. Because it's just like we're human and we keep evolving.
Okay. So any other book recommendations? It doesn't have to be sex, but it can be whatever you feel would be of value.
A friend of mine, Dedeker Winston, she has a book called The Smart Girl's Guide to Polyamory. And it's about polyamory, but also about, it talks about all kinds of non-monogamy as well as monogamy, conscious monogamy. It's a really good, really well-researched book by Dedeker Winston. I love the book The Untethered Soul by Michael A. Singer. It got famous because of Oprah, but it's a really lovely book that helps you to recognize that you don't need to believe your thoughts, and that if the more you keep your heart open, the less you'll suffer. So I really love that book too. And I actually on my website there's a which is yourwildawakening.com, there's a link to a bunch of books that I recommend.
Okay. What, if anything, keeps you up at night?
I don't really have that issue. Every once in a while, I'll have trouble sleeping. It's usually because I drank some sort of caffeine too late at night. I have dealt with some chronic pain issues, which sometimes make it hard to sleep. But nothing keeps me up at night.
No, like existential crises or anything like that. Worrying about world problems or anything.
No, but I've practiced for many years not suffering, and so it's really easy for me not to suffer now because I practiced so much.
Okay. What's the best piece of life advice anyone's ever given you?
Best piece of life advice anyone has ever given me. I mean, there's too many, but I'll just name one. So Michael Taft, who's a good friend of mine, and he created Deconstructing Yourself, where my original Mindful Sex series started. He was my first meditation teacher and is now a dear friend and collaborator. And he told me, when I was worrying about how meditation and spiritual awakening was basically taking away all my drive to do anything, and that who was I going to be if I wasn't an actor? And he looked at me and he said, you continue to do the work you're doing, and your authentic self will bubble up from the deep subconscious and show you what you're here to do. And that has absolutely happened and continues to happen.
Okay. What mistakes do you continue to make despite knowing better?
Oh, that's a good one. It's an important one. So I have a little bit of a problem with saying I'm going to do something and then not doing it. And part of that is just because I have such a full plate. And part of it is some weird block. And so I've been working on that lately. So when I'm with a client, and I owe 2 clients emails right now, come to think of it. But when I'm with a client, oftentimes I just pull my phone out and I send the email right there, because I'm trying to train myself to really do what I say I'm going to do. So that's one. The other area is money. I've definitely had a big spiritual awakening in that realm. I'm not like afraid of it anymore. I don't like lose my mind when I go broke. Like, it's fine. It's like, whatever, more money will come. But I have not created a, a, a totally mature relationship with it. And I haven't really fully brought my spiritual practice into it. I have in a lot of ways, but it's a very slow process. And I know that it's something that that I could really stand to bring some just basic mindfulness to. And I'm working on it, but I do continue to stumble in that area.
Okay. Final 2. Outside of family and career, what investment of time or money has brought you the most joy or fulfillment?
Guess.
Sex?
No, take another guess.
Meditation?
Yes. Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
I've got to say, I do. I need to do a proper meditation. Keeps coming up and up in pretty much every interview I do. I'm sure meditation comes up, and I meditate. I need to do a proper episode on it, because it's one of my number one recommendations for people to try as well. It's definitely it's one of those things. It's super cheesy and a bit airy fairy and stuff, but it's genuinely a life changer. So
it actually works. Well, I can hook you up with
it
Michael
does.
Taft. Michael Taft wrote a book called The Mindful Geek, The Secular Skeptic's Guide to Meditation. And he's a wonderful writer and teacher, and he's becoming very successful. And I'm sure he'd love to join you if you want me to hook you up with him.
Oh, that sounds good. Sounds good to me. Okay, the final one, the big one. What do you think is the key to happiness?
Self-love.
Self-love. Care to expand on that?
Yeah. If you love yourself, then even when you're having a really tough day, there is a kind of unconditional happiness that's available to you. So meditation and all the various work we do to nurture and encourage self-love leads us to unconditional happiness, to a kind of happiness that is independent of conditions. And so I think that the self-love piece is really what allows us to do the work that brings us to that place of unconditional happiness. That doesn't mean like when something crappy happens, we feel happy about it, but we don't suffer.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that, because I'm just imagining some of my listeners out there, especially after the porn episodes and stuff, might have heard self-love and then immediately gone and got his socks out of his bedside drawer because you've told him that the key to happiness is to get back to masturbating, even though we're trying to tell people to stop doing so much of that.
I'm not telling people not to do a lot more. I'm saying, don't quote me on that. Masturbate as much as you want, as long as it's not causing you or anyone else suffering.
Okay, Jessica, this has been very interesting. Definitely the perfect sort of out there different interview to get started with these video podcasts. Have you got any links that you'd like to recommend the listeners, the viewers? Are you on social media? Feel free to plug away.
I'll send them all to you. Is that okay if I send them to you, or do you want me to say
Yeah,
them?
that's fine.
I can. I'm on Instagram. It's at Jessica Clark Graham, and Clark is Clark, and Graham is Graham. So it's my name, Jessica Graham. There's just Clark in the middle. That's my Instagram. My Twitter is Deconstructing JG. Facebook is Facebook / Graham Jessica. You can follow me there. My website is yourwildawakening.com, and the blog that I write for is deconstructingyourself.com.
Okay, cool. Well, I will include all those links in the show notes. And that's about it. Jessica Graham, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. This was a real pleasure. I hope we get to have another conversation sometime soon, because I really enjoyed this.